I'm Jeremy Walsh, Caspian in the forums. Joined with me today on my right is Vi Alexander, our producer here at Soulbound Studios on Chronicles of Elyria. And over to my left is Miguel Sozo Sierra, our world builder and technical designer. And you are joining us for another live Q&A on Chronicles of Elyria. Thank you guys, as usual, for attending with us. Hopefully you do get a chance to catch it live. If not, it will be available on YouTube and other places after the fact. But if you're watching this not live, you probably know that already, so that was pointless. Tell your friends it's also going to be recorded for later.
Right.
Okay, guys.
But on Twitch, you get like the live commentary of people in the comments.
Yeah, I'm sure that's.
Are we not on Twitch right now?
We are on Twitch.
Thank God.
Yeah. So we are doing a live Q&A today on the topic of world building. So hence the audience today. It's one of the things we've been focusing a lot right now as we work towards map generation, settlement domain selection, and of course populating the world for our alphas and things like that. So as usual, we went ahead and put out a forum thread for you guys to post your questions in advance and to upvote and downvote the ones that you guys wanted answered. So we went ahead and curated that list, pulled some together, tried to group them as best we could, and have put together what we felt like was the top 20 or so questions about world building. So without further ado, we're going to jump into those questions and start getting you guys the answers.
I think it is a good idea to preface the whole thing in just saying that, like most of the features in Chronicles of Elyria, we are going about generating the world a lot differently. So it is a procedurally generated world, not a hand-curated one like most MMOs are,
right,
where they've actually had to create every area, every quest, every NPC, every building from hand with artists. Instead, we're taking an approach that is a lot more naturalistic and procedural.
That's true.
Yeah.
Also with artists.
Oh, I mean, there are artists. Yeah, definitely. There are artists also.
Just kidding. We got rid of them.
That's one of the things that's actually really important, though, as what I was saying, is that a lot of resources in most of MMO development goes towards the creation of, static scenes, pre-created storylines and quests, and, even NPC paths where they can walk, escort quests, and things like that. And instead of us spending a lot of time in development of these kind of more static mechanics, we are instead working on building a dynamic world that has seasons and time of day, that actually has gameplay mechanics and design consequences, which stimulates the NPCs to go and do things and be in different places, which creates opportunities for story, even in places that we haven't anticipated for. So it's a lot more emergent in that. It takes about the same amount of resources, but ultimately what we end up with is a far more diverse, far more interesting world, hopefully.
Right.
So
there's another reason that we're trying to adopt the Meow.
The Meow
acronym.
The Meow. That's right. People have asked us, what do we call this new genre that we're creating? And Snipe Hunter contributed the word Meow, which initially we were like, Meow, I don't know, it's not going to stick. But actually, it's sticking pretty well. And others said, well, that's a dumb name for an online genre, to which we reminded them of Muds, Mushes, Mucks, and Moos. And Meow sounds a little less stupid when you put that in that set together.
Well, for the kids at home, what does it stand for?
It is a multiplayer, evolving online world. We are indeed multiplayer. In fact, arguably, we're one of the most multiplayer, as every mechanic in the world is really designed to allow for a large number of players. Of course, we are evolving. Everything about the world is dynamic. Everything from the characters themselves and their ability to age and change and adapt their skills, to the seasons, even to the ecology and how animals will reproduce and relocate and migrate and things like that. So it's a very evolving, non-static world.
Is it online?
It is online too. I was going to get there. And it is not a game. It's a world. And that's actually, I think, one of the most important things about the topic of today, is that if this were just a game, we'd be focusing solely on mechanics. But as a world, we're focusing on how do we make it real? How do we make it seem internally consistent? How do we design it such that it is a world? And here's a good example. We had a conversation recently with somebody, and they were talking about art. Do you create art in the world that drives design, or do you take the design and use it to drive the art? And as an example, if this were a game, normally I would go in and I would create the world after creating... You're driving?
I was driving.
You're driving.
The world.
Yeah, he's driving the world, the whole world, just like rotating. Anyways, so fundamentally, we've built our world first, which includes biome, topology, weather, all these different things that are part of the world, and then the mechanics go in on top of that in order to make it so that the players and characters can survive in that world. So really, even in cases where They're gonna meme. They're just gonna keep memeing. I don't know.
Keep going. I'm helping them.
They're going to. You're helping like
by visual.
Visually,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But we let the world kind of drive the design to some degree. You know, things that we need to add in order to make it so the players can survive in the world. We add, but ultimately it's a function of what the world allows you to do versus not allow you to do. And in some cases, it's been difficult to try and separate ourselves from the traditional model of game design of having to focus not on necessarily what the best gameplay mechanics are or what the most interesting are, but really what makes sense in the world that we're creating. So anyways, are we going to move on now?
Yeah.
You feel like we've prefaced that well enough?
Yeah, and as always, there's some excellent questions from our community, and we'll get down to it now.
All right. We got like 4 pages to get through, so here we go. First question comes from Isoba. Isoba asks, what are the potential sizes of islands during world generation? From the outlines we've seen, they can be kingdom-sized, but what about county or even the size of a single settlement? So a couple things to note. Islands can vary in size. The ones that you guys have been seeing in the sample maps we've been creating have probably been more for the archipelagos. So you've been looking at islands that are really designed for the OCE, Oceanus server. You haven't really been seeing any islands for the other servers, primarily because I don't have, in the stuff that I was showing you guys, the system in place for generating the islands, either small or large. But the other thing is in the maps that I've been showing you guys, they've been roughly 512 kilometers at scale. I mean, that's to say that's the size of the world. You guys are obviously only seeing a single continent. But the point of that is that every single pixel in the image that you guys have been seeing is about a kilometer by a kilometer square. So as a result, if an island were, let's say, smaller than a kilometer, it wouldn't have shown up in that anyways. So, but to answer your question, they range in size from less than the size of a county to probably county size. But I don't actually think that the islands in most cases are going to be significantly bigger than that.
Yeah, they're certainly not going to be kingdom size.
They will not be kingdom size, except for maybe on OCE, in which case having the archipelagos, having it's not even really, they're not really even islands, they're just like subcontinent plates. Like having those being kingdom size makes a little bit more sense.
Suggestion, right, just putting this out there, get a smaller kingdom. And then you can make it kingdom
Just
size.
give away all that extra land.
I'm just saying, this is a problem that has a solution. Have smaller kingdoms. Just a suggestion.
Yeah.
That's like have fewer kids.
Always a good idea. Alright, next question.
We'll see how that plays out.
Alright. Next question comes from us from Immaculate Deception. Immaculate asks, how many variations will be in world generation in terms of placements and size of biomes? How about the placements of geographic features that will strongly affect the biome, such as rivers and small lakes? Will features like that generally be locked down in location? Miguel, as our world builder and a strong advocate for how we go about creating the procedural world, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say, first, there will be a decent amount of variation both in placement and size. More size than placement, but placement will vary. There is some consistency to where the placement of certain biomes would be. There's general areas where you would expect a desert to appear or a coastal biome to appear.
Now, why is that?
Because it's all driven by the various ecological systems that we're using to generate the world in the first place. You know, desert appears as a result of bodies of water and rain shadows and the various surrounding topology, which, while it may vary in size and in placement to some degree, you will find consistency in the sort of spatial patterns that arise in the placement of biomes.
So because of what causes a desert, even though that cause could be in a different location, you're still going to see that same basic behavior.
Correct.
That makes sense. So you mean you're not going to have wetlands not next to coastal areas?
It depends on the wetland, but
There's like so
you
many
won't
different
find
There's so many different wetlands.
You won't find a mangrove in the middle of a forest, for sure. A mangrove is a coastal wetland.
So
I
it'll
don't
have
know.
salt
So-
water.
Yeah. So not an orange grove.
Yeah,
a
no.
mangrove.
Mangrove. It grows mans.
Man's your man.
Yeah.
Oh wait, actually kind of does.
I know, right? And fish.
All right.
Is it, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, so they won't really be locked down in location aside from the real life kind of factors that cause those things to
Sure.
occur in those
I mean,
places.
Yeah, and you can say the biomes of the north will be, like, the tundra will be in the north. You can lock them down along latitudinal bands. That's the most you will find anything locked down, but latitudinal bands are large and varied, so...
Right, because once you get into high altitudes, you can have something that you would see in the very northern latitudes, but in like a tropical band.
Sure, in a different latitude because of the altitudinal placement. Yeah, exactly.
It's also important to note that for this, we are generating a starting continent, which for most people is in the northern latitudes. So while elevation could change things, you wouldn't expect, for example, to see a tundra or taiga on the southern end of the continent. However, if we were generating a continent, let's say on the southern hemisphere, you actually could see those things. But this is actually specifically a northern continent, northern hemisphere continent that we are procedurally generating. So you will see the warm temperate, subtropical, and tropical biomes on the southern end of the biome or of the continent, no matter what we generate.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Atlas Forgiven asks, will there be locations in the world that are actually below sea level, like parts of Death Valley or much of Belgium?
How much of Belgium?
Much.
Much of Belgium.
Much of Belgium. We're not really looking into this. Like, we're pretty much starting at elevation 0 for the biomes that we're working on now. So I wouldn't expect that we would make things that are below sea level. There's not a lot of real gameplay mechanics that would lend itself to that. Although if we found a reason to include that,
you never know.
We could.
Sea level causes some problems. So sea level is kind of where the base water plane is. So presumably anything under sea level is water. As you go inland, there are like relative water tables that can be above sea level, depending upon the soil type. But again, if you were to dig down into the ground and hit the water table, then you're going to hit water, and that's kind of what it is. Now, if we have, let's say, areas that have elevation below sea level, that means that you have gone inland some amount and dropped down below the water plane, the global water plane, and are starting to do stuff. But because we have tunneling and this idea of being able to break into the terrain in order to do things, it runs the risk that you could encounter potentially something that would break the separation between whether or not you're inland and below the water table versus not. And in theory, what should happen in our world is you would get flooding. And in a game, flooding is actually really difficult to implement because of the way we handle water systems. Typically, they're not actually done by like fluid dynamics or fluid sims. They're usually done by water volumes. And unfortunately, we kind of, in general, fake water in a lot of games, and to a degree in COE as well. So you're going to end up with a water plane, and then let's say you were to cut into the side of the mountain and you're below sea level, you're going to be staring at the edge of the ocean, just like sitting there like it's in an aquarium. And that's not ideal. So I don't see sub-sea level things happening in general.
Right. And the amount of effort and technology and everything that it would take in order to model the water as a fluid is
it
just
doesn't exist.
Not
We
worth
can't
it.
do fluid dynamics for entire oceans.
Yeah.
And floods for everyone. Like, we can't.
Yeah.
That could be the game, though, if you wanted it. It'd be flooding the game. Even then, it probably wouldn't run with that many people, but...
Maybe
I'm
we
wrong.
do Oceans of Elyria.
Oceans of Elyria? And you just have a rowboat and... You can't do anything, but you can...
But there's no land.
But man, the water's dynamic. Oh! Oh! Waves! Oh!
Scary.
Waves are scary. Depending on how big they are.
It'd be like Subnautica.
All right.
You know.
Malaise asks, if a map has multiple continents, is it possible that two are close enough together there isn't deep ocean between them? Or will we always need to research advanced sailing to get to a different continent?
Naughty, naughty. We all know what you're trying to do there.
The purpose of making ocean sea travel be something that you guys need to
work towards
when the game launches.
So cute the way you finish a
on,
sentence like that.
Yeah, it's on purpose. So there are no maps that you guys are going to have where you'll be able to get to another continent without doing this. We're not going to accidentally provide a shallow channel or something like that between the starting continent and the second continent, and that's for the fact that we want there to be a certain amount of exploration that's occurring and integration, trade, and having to really deal with the starting continent before too much exploration occurs, and we think that this is going to enhance the gameplay experience quite a lot, especially with people that are coming into these starting kingdoms, trying to create treaties, trying to do some land grabs, is that if there's some tension there, then it's going to cause a lot more drama, a lot more stories, and a lot more interest and reasons for people to work together. If we just allow people to explore the entire continent, from the dawn of time, then people are just going to spread out and nobody's going to really have to interact, and that's going to make the world a really boring place.
Yeah. Hey, Snipe, Max, did anyone ask the classic Alexander the Great archipelago question?
I don't think so.
No one? Disappointing you guys. I was expecting someone to ask, hey, can you somehow place enough ground and dirt between the land and another body of land in order to make some sort of land bridge, like Alexander the Great did? He turned an island
into not an island.
Into not an island. He connected it to the land.
Into a peninsula.
Into a peninsula.
Technical term is isthmus.
Into a straight up isthmus. Not a single person asked that question. Disappointed.
To emphasize what Vi was saying.
I'm not answering that question.
Yeah. To emphasize what Vi was saying, people have asked us, like, why do we have ocean travel? Why are we not allowing exploration of the entire world at the beginning? It is not about content generation. The ability for us to procedurally generate the entire world is there from the beginning. In fact, we have to do it that way to a degree based on how we're creating the world. It's really about creating player density. Giving you guys a large world but forcing you to stay inside of a smaller area. It's like having two opposing animals, something that's territorial by nature. Having them coexist within a smaller space requires they learn to get along or not, whatever the case may be. But either way, there's going to be some kind of an outcome there. There's going to be a conflict and an event and things like that, as opposed to just allowing them to spread out and find their own habitats and their own regions. And so we really want you guys to have to learn to reconcile your differences or not.
Or learn another's weaknesses.
Or learn your weaknesses. And deal with those problems before you get an opportunity to expand outwards. That is why we do not have the two continents within close proximity of one another, because we do not want you guys to be able to easily escape the conflict.
Yes.
All right. The next question is from Asoba again. Will world generation also simulate how old certain elements of the world are, such as mountains? For example, will mountains be new and larger mountains, older, worn-down mountains, or a mix of both? This also could apply to lake formations.
Yes. There will be multiple types of mountains, because it would be strange to only have, pronounced pointy, new formed mountains.
Pointy and new.
Pointy and new. Fresh.
Nobody?
The freshest of
Nobody
mountains. It's over my head, man. I'll be honest.
Before your time.
Probably. And quite frankly, the way that we're doing the world generation with erosion, what's an old mountain? It was once a new mountain that has succumbed to time, and we'll be simulating that as we're doing the world generation. So, yes, we will have old mountains and new mountains. Now, a better question might be, will there be marked differences in those, perhaps in the type of soil that one might find, because in real life, yes, there is.
In case it's not obvious, he's been working on soil profiles for the world a lot lately.
God have I.
And I think there's actually other questions that are closely related to that. So we'll table that and come back to it. World generation dynamics. We know tectonic plates... This is by SoulSpark, by the way. SoulSpark asks, we know tectonic plates are used to simulate volcanic, mountainous, and subduction area zones. Will these tectonic plates be active? And if yes, does that mean some counties and duchies along fault lines are prone to quakes, which can damage buildings?
You were asking if there are earthquakes.
There are earthquakes.
There are earthquakes.
There are natural disasters. So yes.
Moving on?
Moving on.
Great.
There's actually an or here.
Or.
But I think that there's maybe some more depth here. So let's see what Delethris asks.
Okay.
Caspian. If you guys don't mind,
you can take it.
He addressed this one to me.
It's straight up.
All
right, this is me then. In your recent dev journal, Adventure Intro, Readying the World, you showed us some more samples of procedurally generated continent silhouettes that you had that applied to continental drift. He says, cool image here. Speculatively putting the content back together again, you might have 3 separate tectonic plates at work here. Typically, the borders of where the plates meet is where you would see the most seismic activity, resulting in earthquakes and volcanoes. The Ring of Fire around the Pacific in real life is a prime example.
Cool image there.
Cool image there.
Another cool image.
We all know that natural disasters are going to be a thing in COE. We do. Would these follow logical geographic guidelines such as Tornado Alley in the USA, areas more prone to flooding, wildfires, tsunamis, etc.? Cool image here.
Yeah.
If so, would the indigenous population already be aware of these obvious patterns and thus in turn would be aware of them when it comes time for domain and settlement selection? Or is that a surprise for us to discover ourselves? Or would natural disasters be totally random and follow no geographic meteorological patterns at all?
I think that
there's an actual URL here.
Yeah, there's a...
Hold on, we will now look it up.
I think this can be summed up with that last sentence, really. Are natural disasters going to be totally random, or are they going to follow geographic and meteorological patterns?
They do follow geographic and meteorological patterns. Right. Our natural disasters are natural. I'm going to underscore natural. Our natural disasters follow geographical and meteorological patterns. Unnatural disasters, however, are a little more random. That being said, we will probably not go to the degree of having in domain and settlement selection anything inside the user experience or user interface that says this settlement is prone to earthquakes. However, if you are along a subduction zone, if you're along a mountain line or ridge, you are likely to encounter those things more. If you're out in the plains or in the desert, you're likely to have tornadoes and those types of things. If you're on a coastline, you're more prone to having hurricanes and tsunamis and things like that. So I think what we're going to tell people is that we do have natural disasters. They occur for similar reasons as they do on Earth, and you should be aware of those when picking your settlements. So that we're bringing in player skill. The more you know. The more you know.
The more you know.
All right. Next question on world generation content. This first question on this section is by Ikrins. Ikrins asks, to what extent does the world generation insert random elements into the world? And how interactable will they be? Or will they be placed later by the soulbound engine to generate quests? Example of this would be caves, perhaps with some bandit populations, old ruins potentially with hidden rooms, or perhaps even randomly buried chests on islands. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, do we allow the design to drive the world generation, or do we allow the world generation to drive the design? We allow the world to drive the design. So in this case, if there are caves, they will have existed as a result of erosion and natural phenomena that would have caused those caves to occur. And as a result, there could be events, bandit hideouts, and other things that might actually move into those caves. We will not, as a general rule, except in the case for specific story mechanics, be generating caves and caverns and other things solely to fill quest objectives. That's more of an MMORPG way of doing things, and instead we are not an MMORPG. Yeah. And the Meow way of doing things is to allow the world to opportunistically create scenarios for story.
Yes, quests will happen because these places already exist, and those locations will be used in quests and things because they're there. Not because we created something, quest, that needed this element to exist in the world, and therefore we placed it in the world. That goes counter to what we're trying to achieve.
It's also great just from an explorer standpoint, though, because that means that you guys know that we've already created the world procedurally, and there are going to be these things scattered around. Like, you can go explore and find them, whether or not you have a quest objective or whether or not we intended for anybody to actually create a quest or a task there. The world is going to be littered with these types of things. Even though we are procedurally generating the world, we are doing so with forethought. I mean, we do know there needs to be these places as a result, and so that players have a place, not players, but players and characters have these things to go and use as bandit hideouts and things like that. So while we don't create them so that they can be bandit hideouts, we will make sure that they're voluminous enough that they're there to leverage.
Could support it. Yeah, it's design, drive-in world building, drive-in design, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, there will be a lot more in the world than we envisioned. I think because so much of it is going to exist, there's going to be all these spaces that we don't even know about as the developers.
Right.
And can't reasonably explore them.
I've actually I hand place every single cave. There are hundreds of thousands of them, and I have hand placed every single one of them.
But that means that there will be a lot more stories to tell, more narratives that can unfold, and more events that could occur as a result of just the variety of different things in the world. Just like on Earth, there's a lot of we're still discovering new stuff that hasn't been gone to for millennia. Like, there was a cave recently they found in France somewhere that had signs of burning, fire in it and stuff like that, and it's like nobody's been in there in 10,000 years.
Yeah, or unique microbiomes in caves where certain species of animal live.
Exactly.
That we hadn't discovered, and these are old.
Yeah,
they were so old.
The number of quests or, things that people have.
Content. It's like a roguelike.
It's going to be small compared to what's actually available in the world.
You just made Orlando very happy.
I don't know who that is, but...
Orlando?
Oh, Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he makes me happy every day.
Wow, that's
Don't tell his wife.
Good night, everybody.
And I'm out.
Next question. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, that was
Moving
fun. Next question comes from. Are you gonna say Aves or Aves? I like
say
Aves.
Aves.
I say Avis.
I think Aves.
Oh, okay.
Aves sounds better. Sorry if I offended you. I like Aves. So Avis says, how is the team going about world generation in regards to story-related settlement that must exist? For example, is there a possibility that New Haven will look different on every server? That's a great question. You guys have seen that we have a curated version of New Haven that's being done for the prologue, The Awakening single-player adventure. As a general rule, there may be story places that we need to curate and we need to make the same on every server. However, even in those cases, a lot of times we'll set very specific constraints and requirements on the settlement or on the location and then allow it to be procedurally generated on each of the servers to some degree. So, for example, New Haven, there is one version of it that we use for our single-player map. When we go to actually place it into the world, it might be that on each of these worlds that it looks slightly different depending upon where the river is, because there's the river that runs by there, or the terrain topology will be different. And if we were to use the exact same map on each of them, then one would assume either we have to set the terrain topology to be the same in all of them, or there's going to be clipping. So more than likely what will happen is we'll specify like it's a settlement that has to have these resources, these buildings, we want them to utilize the synergy between the buildings to this degree, we want these NPC types, and then allow it to go ahead and procedurally generate and be here, and then that's just going to be it.
If it specifically needs to be very, like...
I mean, there'll be
if it's
hero-
like
there'll be
if it's like
hero
a story,
sets.
if like a story cave,
Sure.
like that we have to like put into the walls of some place, like then we can make that very curated. But
yeah, and we can stitch that into the world as necessary, but largely we won't have to.
Stanton asks, since our merchants pack contains a detailed map of our duchy, will we be able to see things like mines and ruins right away after world creation, or will that level of detail not be added until later in the process?
Later.
Yeah, that'll be when you get into the game at launch or in exposition, is when you will be able to see that level of detail.
You will not have you will not have those maps before then.
Yeah. That detailed map is something that your character will have after you've created that character and they've entered the world. So you cannot see any of that stuff until you've entered the world.
All right. Bryneth asks, it's really funny because I have next to all these names the ratings, like how many upvotes and downvotes they got.
Yeah.
And so every time I see this, it's like Bryneth 22 asks, and I'm like, it's like a
I
dating
really
site.
thought
I'm just
actually
like,
it was a strange way. I thought they all had just numbers after their names, and there was a comma between them for some reason.
that's the upvotes and
Yeah,
downvotes.
yeah,
So
no,
it's
I
like,
didn't know
oh,
that
Bryneth
actually,
22. It's almost like that's saying that Bryneth is 22, and this is like a dating list. But no, that was just the score of that post.
That's interesting that you thought that.
I'm just like, Aves 30, Bryneth 22. It's like, why are they
Aves,
getting?
you're
They're
too
getting
young.
They're getting younger as they go
You're
down.
too young for
Anyways.
this.
All right. When we see the maps during map selection, how much more work will the maps go through before domain selection and even exposition?
Thrice as much at least.
A lot. So it's important to understand that we do this kind of hierarchically. So at the outset, we need to know what the shape of the continents are going to be, the silhouettes. You guys have already seen some examples of that. Then we add in the topology and the weather and temperature and all that, and we generate the world at about 1 kilometer per pixel in terms of resolution and detail. Then we multiply that by 8, and then by 8 again, and then by 8 again, and then by 8 again, and then it gets really big. And so at some point in the future, a single texel of data, let's say, is roughly 1/4 of a meter, whereas right now one of those is 1 kilometer. And so as you can see, there's a huge difference between 1 kilometer and 1/4 of a meter. And so as we go along, we will do the next layer where you can see, the topology and the mountains and the rivers and things like that, and then we'll start adding in details about, where the settlements are, which is what you'll see in settlement and domain selection. But then we have to go even further to where the individual caves are and, the roads and all that stuff, which you can't see when each texel is, a kilometer, that sort of thing. So we will be adding a lot more detail. For example, here is a forest down to here is where a tree is. there's a difference. At one level, we're just focused on what the ecology is in a region, and in another case, we want to know where every single individual plant is going to be.
Yeah.
And that's much later.
Yeah.
So at each stage between map selection, domain and settlement selection, and then
kingdoms and expo.
Yeah, and everything, like each of those is going to be another layer or two of detail, but with the same underlying data. So the maps that we generate and use in the map voting, so that we know which map goes to which server, those are going to be the seed that we use for the remaining work and stuff like that. So they're not going to, like, once you've chosen the shape of the map that you're going to have on your server, that's not going to change. It's just going to become more and more detailed.
Yeah, we refine the details, we do not change them.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Seeing the forest for the trees.
Nice.
Nice.
All right.
It's a follow-up.
It's a follow-up to that one.
This one.
Yurik's question. Okay. Yurik has a follow-up that says, how is the team going about world generation in regards to story-related settlements that must exist? For example, is there a possibility that New Haven will look different on every server? Follow-up question. Please, could you also address how are you going to manage the placement of ruins, abandoned buildings, ancient temples, and things like that? So that's the follow-up. Those things are not natural in terms of, like, it has nothing to do really with the way in which the topology and terrain and weather and stuff like that is generated. That's more time-based. And we have an entire system we're developing that's after world generation that's focusing on the rise and fall of settlements. We've got 3 different ages of history that we have to write about and incorporate into the world. So there will be a lot of things that have come and then disappeared by the time you guys go. And in fact, if you've looked at some of the screenshots and stuff that we've been building out for the Prologue, The Awakening, which is the single-player game we have, you've already seen fallen skeletons of titans in a region called Titan Steppe. Historically, these titans have been there for a very long time, but that is lore and history that we're already aware of. So things like that are things that we're already considering when building out the world.
Yeah, because you guys are going to be coming in the 4th age.
They're in the 4th age.
Yeah, so there's 3 ages prior to that.
Almost 4. I mean, you're 817 into the 4th age, so there's also 817 years into this age.
It's been going for a while. So there's some stuff that's going to be happening. Yeah.
Cool.
There's some stuff that's going to be happening.
Yeah, so the placement of those things is going to be happening.
What? You look at the camera. Yes.
The audience requests a wink.
A wink. From her.
From everyone.
A wink?
A what? Synchronous winking?
Yep.
That's a thing?
Synchronous winking?
I don't know why, but they're requesting.
What?
Okay.
They need to make a GIF.
Monkey.
Yeah, feel free to Photoshop that. World generation terrain. World generation Terragen. Gutsa asks, does world generation also simulate underground geology to determine the potential resources such as ores, aquifers, oil, etc. that can be found? I will let you answer this one because I know that this one is stuff that you have been dealing with.
Yes.
Resources and soil stuff.
The answer is yes. That is all handled by the procedural generation of the world because
Did we get through all of this?
Yep. No, I just
Because
threw it over my shoulder for the fun of it.
all of those things are just elements of the environment, and they're inherently existing in specific places as a result of the environment. Because we have that data already when we're generating the world to begin with, including the rest of it is just a matter of course. Like it doesn't actually require much more beyond that, and it wouldn't make sense to go and individually place those things.
Right,
Because they're going to spawn naturally based on the locales that you would expect them in. Like, ores will have specific places, soils will have specific places, various resources will all exist within the biomes that they should exist within.
Right. You're not going to have a random copper vein in the middle of a field.
No.
Necessarily, because...
I mean, I don't know.
That's
Depends.
Not necessarily where copper is.
Depends on the biome, but probably not.
Right.
So
It's certainly not like World of Warcraft or other MMOs and stuff like that, where they've got these spawning resource
Sure.
nodes that have some amount
Yeah.
of distribution, and certainly they would include more in areas that seemed like they made sense.
Yeah.
Like more flowers in fields and more ore in mountain areas,
Yeah.
but they could just be sort of anywhere.
Right.
And that's not how we're doing it.
Right.
Arabs asks, some times ago, there was a thread with the idea to put the world generation component into a map generation tool which could be sold to the community. e.g. for making maps for pen and paper games, to generate additional funds. Is this still an idea under discussion, or did the idea get scrapped? So, quick call out on that. That was actually an idea the community had. That was not actually one of our ideas, nor was it one that we were seriously considering. As I mentioned when I heard about this idea, the world generation tool that we're using is something I'm custom building, and it's designed to build a world 512 by 512 kilometers. It takes terabytes of data in order to store the world that we're creating. And while it can potentially be scaled down, it's really designed to build a world like what we're creating, and it's not intended to be something that we sell to the community as a content.
How many bytes of data does it take?
Terabytes.
How many? Terabytes.
All right.
It's pretty good.
It is good. All right. So terabytes of data. That being said, we do have the adventure toolkit that we're looking at doing, and the adventure toolkit's designed to allow you guys to create adventures and campaigns that you can run in a small multiplayer version of the rule system that we have for Elyria. That will allow you to do some biome generation, and it will use a lot of the same tools we're using for the world generation, but it's not going to be on a whole world scale. It'll be on a much smaller scale than that. Cool. Feith asked, when generating a world, will there be a balance between the biomes, or could it be that we get worlds with 40% jungle and 5% alpine forest, while other worlds could have mostly cold biomes?
You won't have variation to that degree. There won't be a hard set limit to the percentage of biome A versus biome B. There will be some variation, just based on the fact that we've already said that the sizes of biomes can vary. But you won't have a Hoth-like planet, just a Vice, probably. That does sound cool, though. At least it's not planned for the procedural generation, for the world generation.
The real question is, are there water plumes?
Water plumes?
Never mind.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, is there more to that question?
No, that was really what they were asking.
Yeah.
In general, the biome sizes are plus or minus like 5%, 10%. They're not all the same because it's procedurally generated, but you're not going to end up with one continent that is vastly different than another one. Not within a continent, yes, but the starting continents that we show you guys, because the latitude ranges are similar, the weather patterns are somewhat similar, the shapes will be radically different, but in general, you're not going to end up with something that's way different, primarily because that would not do justice to one tribe over the others. It would put one tribe potentially at a specific disadvantage, and also, you guys have the opportunity to vote on these maps, and I suspect that either one of two things would happen. You guys would vote on the map that would allow you to focus on having as many people in the favored biome as you guys think you can have, allowing you to escape the challenges of dealing with the harder biomes, or you would discard any that are not roughly equal. And I don't want you guys to do anything. I don't want you to do either of those. So we're generating the worlds so that they are roughly equivalent, but not the same.
Mm.
Yep.
Snipperhoofed.
Okay.
Snipperhoofed asks, how large will transition between biomes be? Does one biome end in one county and the next start in another, or does the transition happen across multiple counties?
It will vary, because transition biomes are not all the same size, and the distinction between one biome and another is not always obvious in terms of being a distinctly different biome that separates another distinctly different biome with another. Sometimes the transition is much more gradual. For example, the transition between a mixed broadleaf forest and the northern boreal forest really is sometimes just as simple as, okay, there's getting to be less and less mixed trees, there's less broadleaves, there seems to be more conifers, and then suddenly, boom, there's only conifers. And that happens pretty gradually, as opposed to the transition zone between the taiga and the tundra, the tundra-taiga interface, which is a distinct forest region that would separate the two of them and be of a certain size. You know, depending on what biome you're talking about and what transitional biome you're talking about, you will have varying sizes. There's not a hard, fast rule.
It's good thing to note, too, that there are natural boundaries, but natural boundaries don't always exist between two different biome types. You know, if you come to the edge of a mountain or the edge of a forest, that's a good logical place for one county to end and another one to begin. But as Miguel was just talking about, inside the transition between two types of forest, specifically transitioning from a mixed to a more coniferous forest, there isn't a point where in the middle of that you're like, now that we've lost all of our mixed leaf forests or all of the deciduous forests, now we should suddenly change to a new county.
Right.
It's not that obvious.
Right, or like a savanna, grassland savanna, and a tree savanna.
And there's just always
there's the first tree.
That's
That's definitely the
line
edge of the county.
between all of them. Yeah.
All right. Matriarch asks, when generating maps, will a symmetrical balance or asymmetrical be the target? Not only regarding size, but resource distribution, especially considering the OCE, since some kingdoms may be on a larger island than others.
Well, it's absolutely going to be asymmetrical. There's really no way that we can achieve any sort of symmetrical balance. It would also rob the world of conflict and drama and opportunities if we were to make it so that like everything could be pretty much self-sufficient. There's going to be certainly different areas of the world that are going to be more bountiful or have less resources in a particular area, whether it be food or minerals or game, other types of resources that would be helpful. And so it's going to be imperative for trade agreements to happen, for merchant routes to exist, for trade to exist just even between settlements, not even between kingdoms, but to be able to make sure that people are getting the things that they need. Some settlements are going to be in areas that are excellent trade routes, but they don't have a lot of resources of their own, and so they're going to largely import things, but they get a lot of benefit by people traveling through there. And then they can be a center for more diplomacy or mercantilism, versus a place that has a lot of resources, but maybe the conditions are more harsh and people don't necessarily want to travel there or live there a lot. So there's a few caravans that come out, once a year or twice a year to deliver the resources to these more mercantile centers. So there's a variety of different reasons that a settlement or a domain could exist and could flourish under different conditions, and it's not all based on what's in the biome necessarily. Sometimes it's where you are placed geographically, sometimes it's just ease of access, variety of different things, taking control of different trade routes. So
comparison.
Yeah.
Be risk, the game of, or access and allies, the game of. Location matters.
Yeah.
Not everyone gets to be Germany. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not everywhere is going to have resources, and not of all the same types. Some places might have an abundance of food, but not other materials, and another might be just the opposite.
Yeah, access and allies is a great example.
Great trade partners, and we want those things we want those asymmetries to drive stories.
All right, you guys answered that one nicely. Atlas Forgiven asks, what is the highest possible elevation of a mountaintop in Elyria? I imagine there is some kind of limit so we don't end up mountains twice the size of Everest or something like that. You're right, we don't have mountains twice the size of Everest. Ultimately, it comes with how we're storing the data, because we do need to store things in a way that is efficient computationally and mathematically. But it turns out, and this is just further evidence that we're living inside of a simulation, that in a 16-bit number, if you're using fixed point arithmetic, that you can make something that is roughly the size of Mount Everest at around 22,000 feet, around 6,000 meters, which is 18,000 feet, I can recognize that, but it's around 20,000 feet is about the same, plus or minus. So positive 20,000, negative 20,000 is about the range that you could expect. So there is a feet.
How many meters?
6,000
meters. So plus or minus around 6,000 meters, plus or minus sea level. So that means that in theory, if we choose to at some point in the future expose underwater travel through technology, you could equally have something that is 6,000 meters under sea level also. All right. World Interactivity. Kira Lore asks, will biomes also be what you see, what you get? As in, can you harvest or collect any flower, plant, or rock you see?
So there is a expectation that a lot of the various elements of the world will have some use if we have gone through the effort of creating them in the first place. Now, you won't be able to pick up an individual pebble per se, but the idea of gathering a group of rocks would exist. The idea of gathering sand rather than an individual grain exists. Sand's used in glass blowing, for example. the idea of gathering leaves rather than an individual leaf exists. But we are not going to simulate every single object down to its most granular form because it would ultimately serve no purpose. There is very little you could do with a pebble. Please don't correct me on that. What about a slingshot? Fine, whatever.
Well, with a specific pebble versus like any old pebble.
Yeah, and we don't need to represent a specific pebble to achieve our design goals. We just need to represent the idea of a pebble, or represent the idea of leaves as a resource that can be gathered and then potentially used.
So let's say that we wanted to gather pebbles.
Sure.
So I'm wandering around in the world, and I look down on the ground, and I see that the texture of the material of the ground is pebbly, let's say rocky.
Right.
So you wouldn't assume necessarily that I could reach down and grab a specific pebble, but would it be fair to say take a shovel to the ground in order to collect pebbles?
Absolutely, and that's where the what you see, what you get kind of comes into play. Resources will be found where you would expect them to be found. You're going to be able to gather sand from a sandy area that
I really want to go out. I'm
straightforward.
going to harvest that mud for sand. I'm totally going to do it. Just be like, oh, that's probably sand under
Sure.
there.
And you can pretty safely expect that if there is a specific feature that would suggest that there would be this type of resource, and we have gone through the effort of including that resource in the game to be used, then you will find it there. I can accurately and consistently find sand in a beach. I can accurately and consistently find leaves in
a forest.
In a forest with leaves, not a
deciduous,
not an evergreen
coniferous
forest. Yeah.
All right.
But generally, most of the things in the world are going to be harvestable from, because most things on a planet are useful for something. So soils and dirts and sands can be utilized in agricultural or glass blowing things. There's
masonry,
clay masonry,
pottery.
Right, tons of uses for all that sort of stuff. So like the ground, you're going to be able to harvest from it in a variety of different materials. Same thing with like plants and foliage. There's a ton of different things that you're able to make with plants.
What are some of the things that you can even harvest with plants?
Harvest with plants?
Or, harvest from plants.
Oh.
I mean, there's flowers, seeds,
the stamen.
Barks, if you really want to.
Bark, roots,
twigs,
sap,
fruit. Like, there's a ton of things.
Even an apple tree itself can provide so many different resources depending upon how you harvest from it and what tools you use on it.
And there is a difference between what is harvestable and what is creatable through the processing of said harvestable materials. So, in a general sense, the uses of a specific thing may be more than just what is immediately.
Yeah, but generally we want just about everything in the world that we've put into it to have a use in some craft or profession and to be harvestable from.
Right.
But then the follow-up is a good question.
Will we be able to research this is from Kirillor also, will we be able to research seemingly useless flora, fauna, and rocks to discover they are, in fact, a valuable resource?
Absolutely, yes.
It will be up to you to discover that they are valuable, though. While you'll be able to wander around and pretty much pick everything, pick a bunch of leaves off of a bush and get some dirt off the ground and kill a rabbit or something like that, you're not inherently going to know what to do with the materials.
Not a Kipik, are you?
You're not inherently going to know.
Killing a rabbit?
She's picking plants and killing rabbits.
Yeah.
Kipik
pick plants.
But you're not inherently going to know what to do with those materials, and some may be more useful to you than others. If you don't know how to turn, like, rabbit intestines into cat gut or something like that, that's not going to be a super useful thing for you. But if you do, that's a very valuable resource for you. And so somebody who has that knowledge and skill is going to prize different parts of different things that are harvested in different ways.
Discovery is important. It's important to understand. It's important to have a system that's in-depth enough for you to be able to access new things of that system as you continue to engage with it. if that makes sense.
So the next category was things that were uncategorized in general, but put under the heading, and I'm going to quote here, cool questions to get to if there's time.
How are we doing on time?
We've got 10 minutes left.
Yeah, we got
we're doing good on time.
We're doing
then.
well on time. So we're going to go ahead and address this. This is the last, basically 3/4 of a page, is on cool questions to get to if there's time. So let's do that. Mace asks, will the procedural world generation automatically determine whether a body of water is fresh, salt, or brackish? What would the distinction need to be, or would the distinction need to be added in manually?
The answer is absolutely.
Not manually.
It was not manually. It is done on its own. If we are generating, well, first of all, anything that's not continental is salt water. And then when we generate the terrain topology, we identify based on humidity and elevation where water is going to accumulate and flow downhill, which generates rivers, and where the water table cannot sustain the water, but also is high enough that it will pool there, you'll get fresh water. And if that happens to happen at the edge of a coastline, then you'll end up with brackish.
There are rules that dictate the placement of these things, and they have been
There are rules,
studied
people.
exhaustively.
You must follow the rules.
Yep. So they will not be manual.
It is not manual. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Consider, guys, this is a full world. I'm not going to go around and be like, you're brackish, and you're freshwater, and you're salty.
That's so true.
All right.
What do you, friggin' soil from?
I think you got that backwards. I'm
salty.
He's fresh.
Ooh.
I'm fresh.
All right.
Yeah.
Wait, does that mean I'm
Fresh
brackish?
as a summer ham.
I'm kind of brackish, kind of fresh and salty at the same time. I don't know. There's no good place to take this conversation. All right.
I think there's plenty of good places to take this conversation.
Kate asks, is there a day-night cycle per year like the northern countries have winters with very large nights or nights that last for 24 hours and very long daytimes during the summer? Really what he's asking is does your latitude affect the length of your day and night cycle, or is it seasonal? The answer is no. We are simplifying the world. We do not have time zones, nor do we have changes in the day-night cycle depending upon latitude or what season it is in. We do, however, have a change in the day and night cycle. They are not symmetrical. We have, basically 1.8 hours of daytime to 1 hour of nighttime. So there is a wobble on the planet's axis, but it is not.
It's a binary star system.
It's a binary star system, but it is not. There's no perennial changing of the sun position. Sorry, no.
I would like to see 28 days of night, though.
I mean, that could be an event.
Potentially.
There's the longest night.
Sure.
We actually have other reasons for that.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so Kuraruku.
Kuraruku.
Yeah. All right. What does it mean?
It doesn't mean.
All right.
As far as I know.
All right. In some of the sample continent pictures, you have two larger land masses along with the archipelago. We know the archipelago is for the oceanic server, but will North America and EU servers have the potential to have a two-continent map split by a sea like in the sample given? In general, no. We might throw some in for you guys to add on to vote for your voting, but the thing you have to keep in mind is there is a finite amount of space for the starting continent. And the reason why we have an archipelago in Oshii is because they have a lower population of players in that region. And so we want to make sure that the world doesn't feel empty for them, and that by adding in extra waterways, it forces them to live in tighter, closer, smaller land regions, which makes it so that even though their overall map size is the same, during the early days of the server, it's going to feel just as dense in population as the other servers do, even though there are less players in that region in the real world. Whereas on the continents that we have for North America and in EU, but North America in particular, we have a high player population, and we don't want to add in those extra waterways because the population could potentially become too dense. Also, those act as a natural barrier, and they do prevent some level of conflict, and we don't necessarily want that either. I don't know where that came from. We don't want that either. So it's unlikely that we will allow for a two landmass continent in the North America and EU, but it is not out of the question. If we find one that we're just like, man, that is amazing looking, let's throw it on the vote and see what happens, then we can. So we reserve the right to do it if we want to, but I would not count on it.
Yep. Yeah, it's very population control and having a certain density to drive interest, drive conflict and opportunities is something that is important to us. Just the reason that we gave the similar answer to earlier.
We got less children and population control. Look, the conversations we have in the office sometimes are just so politically incorrect.
But that's why you can't just go to a new continent. There's not going to be something that won't require ocean faring to get to a new continent. Is again for similar reasons.
Yep. Roarer asked loudly, are resources generation balanced in units of a country or duchy or biome? In other words, will we find resources for basic clothing, tools, leatherworking in every county or every duchy or every biome?
How optimistic.
Yeah, I wasn't optimistic. The answer is not yes and no. Will there be resources for basic clothing and tools in each biome? In each biome, yes. In each county and duchy, not necessarily. Also, the resources you have available for things like clothing and food and tools and stuff like that are not likely going to be the same or of the same quality in every biome. So in some areas, you might have tools that are made of metal, while in other places, you might have tools that are made out of wood or out of stone, which creates an inherent advantage in terms of tool and resource usage in the regions that have those other kind of higher hardness materials. That, again, lends itself to the types of challenges that you face in one biome or another. And I think really what we want to encourage players to do is to look at the different biomes. And obviously there's a lot more discovery and a lot more information we're going to be providing to you guys over time. But really take a look at the biomes, think about what kind of play style and challenges you guys are going to face, and then pick a biome that works for you. If you pick an area that tends to have lower food, less resources, what you're going to find is that area requires a little bit more work for you guys to survive and to profit in that region from a just raw resource standpoint. On the other hand, we might balance that asynchronously by making it so that the resources that do exist in that region have lots of uses in other biomes and are going to be in high demand. So you guys can charge a lot in terms of trade in order to provide those resources to the other biomes and the other kingdoms. And that is intentional.
Indeed.
All right. Delethorus asks, Caspian. Oh, this one's for me. Caspian, your recent comments regarding the potential of floating settlements has generated a lot of excitement when the worlds are created. Will there be a wind system, even if it's simple like the winds blow north for 3 in-game months, then west for 3 months, etc.? Or will sailing vessels be able to sail at the same speed regardless of which direction they are headed? So, if you've taken a look at the boats, you notice that we have rowboats. We also have sailing rowboats. We also have non-sailing rowboats. The barge does not have a sail. The intention here is that you will sometimes want to leverage the wind, and sometimes you either will not want to or cannot. So we do have a weather system and we do have a wind system. We use that wind system to help us identify what the humidity is in different regions, and in combination with the barometric pressure or atmospheric pressure, it helps us identify the actual fundamental nature of the biomes, like whether or not there's rivers and lakes and stuff like that there. But the wind changes regularly. It's not static, it's dynamic. So we have winds that are blowing against each other at different rates that cause the winds to create pathways, if you will, air currents. And so sometimes it will be easier to sail with the wind. Sometimes you'll want to put the sails down and row against it. So, yes.
Also, you might want to research some different types of like boat travel and stuff, because there's some cool things you can do with sails.
There are. We should probably at some point in time think about providing them boats that have sails.
We did. It's called a sailing rowboat.
The sailing rowboat.
And it's available in the store right now.
All right, our last question for today, guys. And then we'll do our closing. But Regleb asks, how do you determine the climate of a region, and how heavily does it rely on real science? In the immortal words of Matt Damon, we are sciencing the shit out of this game. Most of it's based on science. We have our subject matter expert program to help us where we are not experts on the science and math behind these things, but we do, and I think take a lot of pride in the amount of work that we spend in understanding the natural phenomena like geology and ecology and weather systems and things like that exist in our world as a basis for what we do in Elyria. Now, Elyria is not Earth. It is a fantasy world, unlike our world, and so it does not necessarily adhere to all of the same rules. And also, it's a simplification in order to make sure that the game is fun and not necessarily, like I said, a simulation. But
also for our own sanity.
Also for our own sanity. But, we do, where it makes sense, at least understand the principles from science. So, things like barometric pressure, or atmospheric pressure, and rain shadows, and how they're formed based on rainfall over the top of mountaintops, and cooling water, and the dew points, and the fact that earthquakes happen along the subduction zones and uplifting, and how the tectonic plates were formed. I mean, if you've taken a look at some of our maps, you can actually get a pretty good idea of how how those land masses were originally placed together. And that's because we do our world generation using tectonic plate movement, similar to the way we would have had in our world, or do have after our 8th possible continent orientations.
Yeah, this is Pangea was just one.
Pangea is just the most recent one.
Yeah, there's actually several different supercontinents that have existed throughout time.
So, yeah, no, it is.
Pangea was the best.
It is based on.
I don't know about that.
I don't know if it's the best, but a lot of the ecology and life that we have today, and the fact that we see different species of animals in different places, was a direct result of Pangea. Before that, we didn't actually have a lot of mammals anyways. A lot of that was more bacteria and birds and things like that. So. But at any rate, it is science-based. We do as best we can to make it science-based, and not just in science, but our economic system, the political systems, the religious systems, as much as possible, we let the real-world equivalents of those influence how and why we go about creating them in-game, because it adds an element of familiarity that makes the world feel real. It's not a surprise. I think at some point we're going to have to worry about the uncanny valley, but maybe in a different way.
Yeah.
I mean, we see things as being close enough. For those who are watching that aren't familiar with the uncanny valley, we have discovered that as things look more and more human, they start to approach a level of familiarity where we are comfortable with them up until a point, and then suddenly it's no longer comfortable. It's too much like us without actually being us, and that it creates this like drop-off where we no longer feel good about being in the proximity of it. We get afraid of it. It's creepy. And that creates this valley. And then after you cross that valley, then suddenly there's a sharp incline, and then we're okay with it again. And that you have to cross this uncanny valley in order for AI or robotics or computer graphics or animation, cinematics, any of these things to really feel good. And I wonder if in the development of this we're going to encounter similar uncanny valleys in things that aren't necessarily visual. Like, it's enough like a religion in our world, but not too much. Maybe so much that it feels a little uncomfortable, and we have to like get past that equivalent. Similar with like the ecology.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know. I mean, overall, we're going for.
Like that.
We're going for.
I've already encountered similar considerations.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to ecology.
Yeah. But overall, we're going for verisimilitude. So we want something that
Similitude
is
is
similar to
versus
veracity.
veracity.
Right. Yeah, it should feel right, not necessarily be 100% accurate to a simulation. So we'll see.
All right. Okay, guys, thank you again for joining us on this Q&A, live Q&A on world building. We had a great time. Hopefully you guys had fun watching us and hanging out with us as we discuss these things as well. Good questions.
Great questions.
Yep. As usual, we will move this over to our YouTube channel at some point. It'll be available, linked to from our website for a period of time, but you will be able to find it on YouTube. Also, we will have another live Twitch streamed Q&A at some point in the not too distant future. We're going to try and do these as regular as we can, probably every month or two. I think we said something like that.
About every 6 weeks.
Every 6 weeks or so. So we don't have a topic for the next one yet, but we will let you know as soon as we get there. In the meantime, I know that Serp had let you guys know that we will do our best to come in and discuss and have conversation with you guys in Discord. So if you're not already on our official Discord server, you can join our official Discord server at discord.gg/Chronicles of Elyria. And many of us will be in Discord after this live Q&A to have further conversation with you guys for a half hour, an hour, something like that. So if you'd like to continue the conversation and you want to talk to us personally, make sure to join us on our Discord server at discord.gg/Chronicles of Elyria.
Or come onto the forums and start some threads about some of the stuff that you heard that you want to learn more about. There are a lot of people in our community, if you are newer to our community, that have a lot of the knowledge that we've been dispensing over the last couple of years and can help answer a ton of different questions. There's a lot of resources in our forums, in our game guide, that you can come and familiarize yourself with the different things that we're doing in Chronicles of Elyria.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. Go ahead.
I was going to say shout out to Skilorus. Yeah.
Okay.
Why'd you have to say it weird?
How do you pronounce it?
Skilorus.
That's how you pronounce it. What are you talking about?
That's part of
when you see the name, it's just like.
It's all.
Anyways, all right, guys. Thank you again for joining us. We enjoyed it. We'll look forward to doing it again with you guys soon.
See you guys again.
See ya.